Welcome to a very special guest hosted episode of our podcast, focused on private equity and the fascinating stories that come with the territory. This is your host, Scott Markman, and I want to guide you through today's episode in what we're calling the Go Fungal Takeover. While we're finalizing exciting new content for Season 2, which drops later this month, we thought we'd keep it lively by bringing you a fresh perspective as I move around the table into the seat of podcast guest. Today, we've got Matt Cornelison from Fungi Media, our podcast production partners, who hosted me on their own Go Fungal podcast to explore how PE professionals and portfolio companies can use LinkedIn to build brands, engage audiences, and align marketing with sales to drive growth. So grab your favorite pint, settle in, and let's get to it.
Please fasten your seatbelts.
In 2013, our agency was actually featured on a reality TV series.
Really? Okay.
And it was
It wasn't The Bachelor.
Well, it's like that. It was
but for business.
Project Runway for agencies.
Okay, cool. Today I've got Scott Markman from Monogram Group, who is a brand consultancy and marketing agency for private equity and their portfolio companies. Scott, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. So today we're going to talk about LinkedIn and how do we help these folks in private equity rise above the noise on LinkedIn.
Excellent.
Give me a little bit of background on
Sure.
sort of private equity and kind of how you guys
Sure.
serve that.
So we're ending this month our 35th year of being in business.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I started
That's awesome.
the agency Jan 1, 1990. Coffee table apartment near O'Hare. Classic, I just hung my shingle. I had 90 days to make it and gave it a go. Fast forward to about 5 or 6 years into it, our name started to get passed around this kind of growing thing called the private equity ecosystem.
Yeah.
And we started to pick up clients in 1997. And so today, our client count for PE firms, credit providers, large family wealth offices, and industry consultants is 90.
Wow. That's a
And
lot.
so it's maybe not exclusive to things, but 90 is like unheard of.
Well, I mean, you've been in this since the beginning, so you've seen how this has evolved. And as my understanding is that it's grown pretty significantly in terms of like the need for marketing and branding. And
So what's happened over time is that this niche investment strategy kind of sector exploded. Today, depends who you ask, maybe let's say there are 4,000 firms that kind of do this, full time. Right now, there is what's called dry powder, meaning money to be invested sitting on the sidelines, $2.5 trillion
holy cow.
today. So the amount of capital and the institutions that are writing big checks into these firms to be put to work, meaning go buy companies, grow them, sell them in return, X% over what you paid for it. That's the model of private equity. $2.5 trillion above the money that's already invested. It's a
Right.
monstrously large. There's lots of runway to be, pursued.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that's exciting. Now, Fungi, we have a lot of experience helping corporate clients and getting them on LinkedIn, getting their message out, building their personal brands, building their company brands. But I guess starting with on the private equity say, why is LinkedIn important?
One of the great realities of, business America in 2024 is that private equity professionals and all the folks related to that ecosystem, the one social media platform that they will focus on, follow, and get content from is LinkedIn. And business, it is ground zero, ground one, ground two, ground three. It is the meeting, square.
Right.
If you can be kind of a hero of LinkedIn, it's going to help, someone's personal career and their firm and all they're trying to impact. That's the place to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's this sort of trend that's been happening and unfolding, and people hate the term influencer marketing. Some people are like, gosh, we don't need any more influencers. But the reality is like the employee is becoming the next influencer. And the employee could be that person that's out front having conversations with clients as the salesperson, maybe. Sure. That could be the technical expert in a company. That there's all kinds of different sort of
That's right.
experts, and they are becoming the influencer, not only just like in their day-to-day conversations, But now that, LinkedIn is just such a growing platform, especially on the business side, this has become a platform for people to become the experts in the room, so to speak, on LinkedIn. And we know that attention leads to new business, and we know it leads to great recruiting.
I want to extend this thought into a specific subset topic, which is the role and the interaction between selling and marketing. Because at the end of the day, while private equity firms are not in the business of selling the way we would all think of selling, their portfolio companies are. You're selling software, you're selling, a complex engineered widget that goes into other widgets.
Yeah.
That's a lot of what happens in private equity. They invest in these great companies that spin off a lot of cash, that have growth potential, and they make widgets that go into widgets.
Sure.
And they have oftentimes old school sales folks or small sales department, but now that they're invested with the private equity, they're going to grow that. Yeah. They're going to grow through M&A, but they're also going to grow through organic cross-sell, upsell, get into prospects, all these kinds of things. So how can these marketing tactics and investments amplify and make better selling activities?
Yeah. I think one simple thing that I always like to, because even in the corporate side, I think there are people who can be the evangelist, the influencer, the person who's out there having the conversation on LinkedIn, that is the seller of the widget, for example. There are questions that customers have about those widgets that they need answered, right? Before they decide to buy. Be the person in the room that's answering the questions, just to be top of mind, even.
And again, for anybody who's watching this is proactive. There's no meeting, but this is as if there were a meeting, and you're getting ahead of topics and answers and these kinds of things, even before you have a meeting, or that will help you get a meeting. Well, these guys know what they're talking about. And that was burning a hole in my department's head last week, and these guys are already talking about it. So I'd like to talk to them further or extend a conversation. You're taking a leadership position, and it's more valuable to take a meeting versus just some guy selling me something.
Exactly, yeah. And I think that's a good note, is to don't show up and be salesy. Don't show up and make your platform be all about, this is why we're the best. This is all about me. This is who I am. Answer questions, bring value that the customer has. They have questions, right? I think that's, maybe thought leadership at its finest, I guess, is showing up, being the expert in the room, being the thought leader, and answering the questions that your customers have. So you're top of mind with them all the time. And then new prospects, you're like, holy cow, I just found this person. Like, that's a question I had. I want to continue to understand, just to make sure people understand, like, the opportunity and like the impact when you're leveraging like your personal brand. And if you can do this in conjunction with the company's brand, that's even more powerful. But just like we have case studies where, we're comparing the results from a corporate brand and then an individual, and putting both of them putting out content side by side, where the large company has 1.3 million followers. That's a lot of followers, right? And the individual only has 1,300 followers, right? Now that's not bad for an individual, but different in terms of scale, right? When you compare the two. But then when we look at the side by side, the content performance, we see things like 30,000 impressions from the corporate side, pretty good in terms of that's a lot of impressions, but 8,000 from a single piece of content from the individual side. 2.38% audience reach on a piece of content is about average for a company that size with somewhat of an engaged audience. 626% growth audience reach from an individual.
Wow.
So it's completely different when you think about like the opportunity for an individual, because people trust people. And especially on LinkedIn, it's a social platform. You're trying to interact with people. We find that the engagement across those personal brands is like multifaceted, multi-people doing this, is way more powerful than just only channeling content through the corporate account.
Now, you can also apply this to audience segmentation. A big part of what we push or advocate in all brand strategy and thinking is that you only get one brand. Starbucks only has one brand, but they have wildly distinctive audiences. They have consumers, and they have employees, baristas, they have suppliers, they have Wall Street, they have the social media environment, and how they message the brand, the frequency, the cadence, the content, those audiences have nothing to do with each other. How they communicate and why, to whom in the world of social media, where they may have cause marketing and experiential marketing and things like that. So private equity firms can think about the same thing. They can have a BD person who only is really talking to iBankers and intermediaries, deal flow. Maybe the managing partner can be talking to current and future investors and pension funds and foundations and family offices and insurance companies. And the director of value creation can lean into thought leadership around best practices around AI or branded marketing or lean manufacturing or whatever. And they can all pick different angles of a common story and lean into the audience that's really intended for in a common platform. It's called LinkedIn. And then being able to message that through video and other means. It's the perfect place to be sophisticated and leading edge in practices and execution.
Yeah, and I think one of the challenges sometimes, it's like, okay, cool, got it. Scott, like, I should be doing this. Like, where do I start? You know, what, like, how do I get going? Like, what's the first step? Like, is there some sort of a plan?
What we advocate broadly around brand. Brand is the everything. Brand starts at the 80,000 foot, right? What is your macro message, regardless of individual audience or deliverer or situation or whatever? If you don't have the big picture worked out, you're just chasing your own tail.
No activation is going to work without
it.
It.
And look, a lot of private equity is shades of vanilla. No one's going to stray off the reservation and do crazy stuff. It's a risk-averse kind of contained environment. But within that, you still want to say, my firm X, this is our message, this is our story, this is what we focus on, this is how we're different and better, to the degree that it's kind of, doable. We got to work all that strategically out and then map a plan. You can make it quarterly, you can make it annually, you can make it, whatever it turns out to be, plan it out in terms of time and budget and role and responsibility, and then execute. And then as you post in a predictable cadence, you need to be measuring.
Yeah, for sure. When we're thinking about like the measurements, I think it's important early on to set some benchmarks. The reality is, if you're just getting started, you're not going to probably see a ton of engagement right out of the gate, like with your very first post. This is a long game, right? Like the level of consistency is one of the things that drives greater engagement over time.
How often you post, what do you post, even what time of day you post, all that matters.
Yeah, it all matters. One example is we know that certain days there are more people on LinkedIn. And so there's some best practices around like stay away from Fridays, focus on, Mondays through Thursdays. Sunday's actually a really good day because people are just checking their phones. I think the more important than like what day and time though is actually sticking to a consistent rhythm for you. If you can stick to some sort of level of consistency where you're doing that every week for the next 3 months, for example, you're going to start to see some growth and engagement because you're starting to create some expectations with your audience, and then the algorithm reacts really well too.
I want to ask a related but different question, which is the idea of tagging folks or hashtags or those kind of, conscious ripple effect connecting dynamics. Let's talk for a second about best practices around that.
Around tagging? Yeah, so something not to do is to tag a bunch of people in the actual post that have nothing to do with the post, and you're just doing it only because you want them to see it. People are like, why do you keep tagging me in this thing? It actually happens to me, and I've had like sort of visceral reactions where I'm like, I barely know this person. They're not making a genuine connection with me, which is the whole point of social media in the first place.
In the agency world, there's a term for that, which is borrowed interest.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want to have borrowed interests like that. I do think it's important that you tag people that are relevant to the post. Okay. For example, a photo where you've got people in it. Tag every single person that's in that photo. That's a great way to boost visibility. And it's relevant to those people too. And they oftentimes like, cool. And then they comment on that, and then comments, being king on LinkedIn, boost the post even further.
Let's talk for a second about, I'll call it not only the cadence of things, but the length of things. What are best practices around that? Because a lot of folks may say, great, I'll do it, and I'll turn on the camera for 5 minutes. And I would tell you, ain't nobody gonna stick around for 5 minutes.
Yeah. If we're talking about video, one of the things that we know about video is that it drives about 5 times more engagement than other types of content. So we do like video on LinkedIn, right? And LinkedIn really likes it. I think thinking about it in terms of 30 seconds at a time is a good mile marker to start. People start to drop off after 30 seconds. But if you have a 30-second clip, it's about a 200% higher completion rate from beginning to end watching the whole video compared to a 1 minute video. So we know that there's drop off that happens after the 30 second, generally speaking.
Now that correlates to, my experience and understanding with YouTube ads, where there's that 6 second, cutoff that people, hit skip.
Yeah.
And then the pricing from YouTube to the advertiser and the 15 and the 30. And it has to do with people's habits. If they are forced to see an ad and within 5 or 6 seconds, they're going to hit skip and then get to what they want to watch. But if something catches them within 6 seconds, they see it at 15. Yeah. At the 16-second mark, they pay for it.
Right.
So that's a whole piece of, advertising on YouTube strategy is these habits of how people look at stuff. But my point is also that it's contextual around where are you looking and why are you there.
Sure.
YouTube, LinkedIn has its own kind of consumption habits that are distinctive from YouTube or from TikTok.
I think it is important to know that there's differences, right, between the platforms. If you think about YouTube as a search engine, which it is, and you think about LinkedIn as like a passive news feed, like Facebook or Instagram, you're on social because you're bored. You're on search because you're actually looking for something.
It's true.
You're looking for a specific thing, and you're trying to find that thing. On social, you're not necessarily always looking for how to exterminate this roach problem I have, right?
I want to pivot now specifically into the world of the portfolio company side of who, we serve.
Sure.
And how to think about that set of opportunities from the private equity firm leadership perspective. How to apply what we're advocating into these portfolio companies and how they can take advantage of this stuff.
Yeah.
If they're, industrial service company or, that kind of stuff often are these categories where selling and marketing is not sophisticated and it's not budgeted for and it's not a part of their ongoing strategies. But what private equity does is elevate these companies while they're adding on, through M&A,
right.
And they're creating a bigger footprint. It's the scaling of things, but also the elevating of things. So how can you start the conversation about how these portfolio companies can consider and deploy these same tactics in the service of their revenue growth?
Like, where do you even start? That's one of the things I think maybe is a positive in terms of if you don't really know marketing really well, you're not a guru in that space. Social is definitely something that can be a minimum viable product for people in terms of cost or in terms of like resources. Like if you know a couple of answers to questions like, what's my brand? What do I want to be talking about? What's the role I can play? That's like the starting point, I think. And it can start with your phone and it can start with something simple and you can work your way up to something more formal, like a video podcast and that sort of a thing. The bar is set low. There's a huge opportunity of even just like getting in the game, period. If you can get in the game, then you're going to be, miles ahead of so many other people.
What is a reasonable expectation for any viewer or listener around if I commit to this, Jan 1, when will the flywheel effect start to take off?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's factors of like the quality of your content, the size of your network. Like if you have 1,000 people following you or connected to you versus you have 5 people following you or connected to you, it's going to be very different. And the approach I might take might be a little bit different. But I think that if you are following some of these things where you're consistent, you have your pillars in place in terms of like, these are the 3 things I want to talk about. You're generating comments. I don't see any reason why you wouldn't start to see like growth every single month. I think you're going to start to see growth every single week over week. And to me, that's just also just a fundamental result of putting energy into something will yield, some impact, whether it's learning or growth or both.
So are you kind of suggesting that the growth will be gradual, but there's no spike moment?
I think there's spike moments when you start to find out what's the most valuable for your audience.
What you're saying is you have to look at your posts and what kinds of content gets the engagement and do maybe more of it?
Absolutely, yeah. So you're benchmarking will be kind of dull at the beginning, and it'll start to get better as you go, because you can look back over the past 3 months to know this one did really well, this one didn't do really well, this one did really well. Why did those 3 things? We look back and benchmark at like, okay, we know that some of these content types perform really, really well. So we're going to double down on those.
You know, the guy that I follow, who I think is brilliant at best practices and about in all these dimensions, is Simon Sinek.
Yeah, he's got a huge following. Yeah.
Some of his posts are visuals with his words. Some are little clips of him interviewing somebody.
Sure.
And it's a potpourri around a common message and brand and cadence and all of these things. But if he has 4 kinds of content, he's constantly mixing it up, but getting out there all the time. And they're all short form, a little bit longer than others, but they're more short form consumption requirements.
For sure.
You read something of his, it takes about 4 seconds. His video clip is probably 30 seconds to a minute.
Yeah. Yeah, I think he's dialed it in, and his team has dialed it in terms of like what works the best, and they're measuring that, and they're getting better over time.
But I mean, if you were going to start to follow somebody, but B, study how and why they do what they do, I might pick if one person in all of business in America, I might pick him.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, hate him or love him, Gary Vaynerchuk is another person who's definitely cracked the code on. I mean, he talks about this stuff, what works on LinkedIn.
We have a collaborative, dynamic relationship. We work together. We've worked together for a year plus. We understand private equity cold better than any agency in America. You're deep experts and proven in, LinkedIn strategies and video development. And so this is 1 + 1 = 5. I mean, we are modeling our own beliefs and our own sort of, I'll call it sophistication of standards just by doing what we're doing here. The old adage of the best way to sell a loaf of bread is to slice off, cut a slice and give it away. So if it's appealing, then we can do the same for you, and to reach out, let's have a dialogue.
Yeah. And I would say if this is something that like, your firm, you yourself is interested in, and you want to like learn more, it's like, start following Scott, start following myself, because this is going to be the stuff that we're going to be talking about this stuff. All right. Well, Scott, thank you so much for joining. This was a lot of fun.
All right.
Fungal.